Stefano Domenicali is reported to be working on a new F1 agreement. The proposals that have been rumored in said agreement, and I want you guys to debunk this if these are bloviated figures, but adding 2 more teams to the grid in the short term, increasing entry fees for new teams from 200 million to 1 billion, and increasing the number of races on the calendar. So let's hit that third point, if that is in case fact. If they increase the number of races on the calendar moving forward in this set agreement, could Spa then stay, or it's always going to be on the chopping block because they find value in other destinations?
Yeah, it's all about who's willing to pay and how much in Formula One. So at the moment, the limit on the amount of races they can have is 25, and that's under the current Concord Agreement. The Concord Agreement exists between the teams, the FIA and Formula One, and basically governs, or sets a basis to govern the sport, almost like a constitution. And there are certain things which are limited in it. One is the amount of races you can have at the moment. Now, Formula One have made it very clear that they want to expand the calendar, but there are a number of questions about that. Of course, more money is great for everyone in Formula One, because the teams will get a bit of that, and the FIA will get a bit of that. But the issue is, at what point are you potentially damaging the sport, or what point do you have oversaturation of races? Yeah, a lot of people in the sport are already talking about that, and rightly so. I think if you look at a season like this where it's been dominated by one team and one driver, then we are very quickly going to lose narratives of what we're going to talk about midway through the season. There's not so much excitement midway through the season, even in a really competitive championship year. I feel like once you get to the middle of the year, you're so far away from the end of the year that you're like, well, it doesn't matter that much. You're so far away from the start of the year that some of the excitement has worn off. So I think there is a danger in having too many races. But yes, it could potentially mean somewhere like Spa has a stay of execution. They could be there longer because they are able to contribute something and add an extra race to the calendar, of course, along with being a fan favorite. But unless they can start to stump up the money to compete with new races coming in, then it's always going to be a question of who can pay us the most, and how many races in total can we have and keep everyone happy. And that's all stuff that will be thrashed out in the Concord Agreement, which apparently negotiations are starting to get underway. It seems like a lot of the teams are quite willing to continue with something similar going forward, but F1 will of course be looking at how it can maximize revenues, and it's entitled to do that because it has to do that for its shareholders, for one, and to become or to continue being a successful business, they have to look at how they can grow. And so one very obvious option is to add more races on, but whether it's a good thing for the sport is another question. And I think it would be really bad for F1 if we start losing some of the really great racetracks. If F1 is going to hold itself up as the pinnacle of motorsport, it needs to have the circuits to back it up. And I'm all for new tracks, places like Las Vegas and Miami coming in, but I'm yet to be convinced that any new circuit that has been added in probably even the last 20, 30 years can stand up to Spa as one of the greatest circuits in the world. Spa is that good, and having cars go around there, Formula One cars go around there annually, I think is very, very important for the health of the sport and the future of the sport, and keeping fans entertained.
Do you think that the second proposal alleged in this new F1 agreement, that entry fees for new teams would increase from 200 million to 1 billion, is in a realm of possibility?
So the figure I've heard, or certainly the figure that was going around earlier this year, was closer to 600 million. So 200 million is basically what you have to pay up front if you want to join the grid at the moment. That was based roughly on the price that Williams sold for several years ago. But it's now clear that Formula One teams are worth a bit more than that, because the valuation that Audi basically put on Sauber when they came in and invested in it was around 600 million. So if you're making it cheaper for new teams to set themselves up and come in than it is the market value of the existing teams, then it's not good for the existing teams. So the teams want that number to be as high as possible, because it makes their franchise, their what they hold, become worth even more. And of course, there is this, the reason we have this anti-dilution fee is what it's called, is because when a new Formula One team comes in, they are entitled to have a split of F1's revenues. And so almost as compensation to the existing teams, you have this entry fee, this anti-dilution fee, which gets split among the teams. And at the moment, when it was set at 200 million, maybe that was fair for what it was worth to be a Formula One team. Well, now everyone considers F1 to be even more popular, to have grown, and for the teams to be worth more than they were a few years ago. Well, it's kind of right that number goes up, but 1 billion does seem excessively high, because it creates such a high barrier for any new team to come in. And then, we really need to go back to the conversation of, is it beneficial for the sport to have extra teams? Are we better off having 10 locked in teams that we know are financially healthy and stable? Or should we kind of open it up to more teams? Because it wasn't that long ago that we did have 12 teams in Formula One. 3 of them were just in a constant struggle for survival. And eventually all 3 of those teams went bust and dropped out of the sport. So I don't think that's particularly good for F1 either, because we're talking about a lot of people's jobs at stake and stuff like that. So as far as I'm concerned, the most important thing is that you have healthy teams. If you think the sport can only support 10 healthy teams, so be it, let's work on that. And then if a new team does come in, they need to bring one, value in terms of who they are bringing in, but also some kind of anti-dilution fee to compensate the others. I do think there is an element of fairness to that.
I think what's commendable about F1 is that they are willing to evolve as needed. But Nate, do you think that there is a realm of possibility where they overstep, they overreach, and they go too far?
In terms of what they're doing right now, in terms of like going after some money in certain areas, do you mean?
Yes, money, adding new teams, adding new races. Oversaturation was a word that Laurence used. I don't want to say, are they too greedy, or are they just trying to capitalize on, the hotness of the sport right now?
Yeah, I mean, Michael Andretti, obviously, he called them greedy, didn't he, at the start of the year, and that goes right into what Laurence was talking about the amount of money going around, and Formula One teams aren't convinced that his team would be a good addition to the grid for a lot of reasons. I think that you can look at this, and I think money at the moment seems to be dictating a lot of things in Formula One. Laurence is absolutely right. I think if Spa went off the calendar, I think it would be crazy. But the fact that can't stump up the same money that, say, Qatar can or Saudi can, that if you're Formula One right now, you're looking at it and you can make more money right now than you ever could have done in Formula One. And it's funny, isn't it? Because that, as Laurence said, that the idea of that being an anti-dilution fee, Formula One is happy when it comes to the calendar to dilute the product and say, well, we're going to have more and more races, more and more money coming in. I don't think the long-term future of the sport itself is being thought about. I think a lot of these decisions seem to be, we can make a lot of money right now with this race, with these teams coming in, whatever it is, and no one is really stopping to think at some point. And you could argue that the boom that we went through with Drive to Survive, there was clearly like a hockey stick style effect. I think it's very, very fair to argue, and very easy to argue, that at the very least that's tailing off at the moment. It might already be kind of tailing off, and I think it's tailing off from a very, very high point. But I think we've already started to see, if you actually dive into ratings at the moment, across the globe, they're really kind of dropping. And I think that's down to the season we're having. But I think that a lot of people don't maybe think that what Netflix sold them is what they're now seeing on TV, in terms of the sport they thought they were kind of getting into, maybe isn't the sport that they're seeing. So when that starts to happen, you have to think 5 years down the line. You can't think right now, where are we going to be? You've got to assume the worst. You've got to look at it and think, well, are we, I suppose, shooting ourselves in the foot right now? 5-10 years from now, are we going to regret some of these decisions that are being made? So I am a bit skeptical about some of the decisions that are being made. I think Domenicali's come in, and obviously, I think he's done a lot of things right, but you look on the commercial side of things, and I think if you're looking at the bottom line of these teams' budgets, there's nothing to be worried about. They're doing better than ever. But if you kind of step back and take a global look at things, I think Formula One's getting itself, maybe it's overstretching in a lot of places, and that never, doesn't matter what sport you are, that's never gone well for any championship or team or whatever. So I think that's a real thing we need to watch over the next kind of few years to see how that plays out.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.